part of his tour, or he went to the IGU and then went to Cambridge, where he was also meeting some Ghanaian community and then party supporters.
Okay.
He expressed view on the region topic, and you all agree that over the last 2 weeks, the topical issue within the shores and for us as a country, good news, but because of also the politics of sometimes the results, where the Vice President used the opportunity to comment on the development in the country. And the development was to the fact that we are experiencing an appreciation of our currency in contradistinction to the United States dollar, which is more or less a vehicle currency or the currency which we trade with. Now, the Vice President's view was to the fact that if you ask the government as to one single policy they have done, you find them wanting for answers in the sense that they can clearly say that this was not within the economic spheres, but we introduced it, and that is what is leading to the result. Because you see, we've been lamenting about the structure of the Ghanaian economy to the fact that if something radical and significant so is not done about the nature of our economy, we will continue to have this perennial depreciation of our currency. So within that context, the Vice President stated that, well, we are having an appreciation of our cedi, but that result we are seeing cannot just be the factor of this particular government put it in place. Because you recall that just in March, when they were presenting the State of the Nation, and I remember I debated the same thing with my brother on this same platform, to the effect that the economic fundamentals were not that bad. We argued same, and we made our point clearly that, look, the foundation that was laid, even though we're coming from a crisis where the economy was virtually in the abyss, we are now moving away, and then the economy was in a good footing. And so therefore, our position was much better for this current government to manage. But they argue strongly that the economy was criminally mismanaged and that there was nothing we had to brace for, a difficult road. So all this in context, the Vice President made a point that, one, the reason why, and let me make this point, look, is we will understand that, and you also understand that correlation does not necessarily mean causation. It is quite established in econometrics, and even if you lead criminal law, those to the causal relationship, they will tell you that the factors that are causing an event may not be those that we are seeing. In all this discussion, no single person has been able to run a causal relationship between the macroeconomic fundamentals and the movement of the exchange rate. We are all assuming that the determinants of the exchange rate, i.e. demand and supply, and demand is influenced by certain factors, i.e. availability of the currency, 2, expectation, 3, the relative price of goods and services in other countries. So all these determinants, we can all put them there and discuss that. But so far, everyone is picking and choosing as to the possible causes of the appreciation of the Ghanaian cedi. But we all know that, try learning that you cannot have supply of dollar be more than the demand, and then the price of the dollar will not come down. That is quite trial learning. So one of the factors that are resulted that we can all agree on is the foreign reserves, because that shows the supply of hard currency within the domestic economy. Now, how do we account for this current, i.e. over 10 billion of reserves? You have to look at the trajectory. How much of this amount was added by the new patriotic government, and how much of it is being added by the current government? If you realize that over 80% or about 80% of the foreign reserves were added or were accumulated by the previous government, and only some 20% is added by you cannot say that the availability of forex within the local economy that is contributing to the depreciation of the United States dollar against the Ghanaian cedi is by the NDC, because the NDPP contributed 80% of that availability, and that availability determines the prices of dollar to the cedi. That is one reason. 2, we then look at expectation. How is expectation formed? Because you see, we have not been able to model again expectation to know how much expectation is feeding into this whole dynamic of exchange rate depreciation or appreciation. But we do know that expectation is an anchor of, 1, availability. If people are aware that we have forex available and we will get it as and when we demand it, they are going to have good perception of the outlook. 2, if they realize the government is consolidating its fiscal policy, it can also signal expectation. If there's also this particular sense that, well, in the coming days, trade in the United States For instance, the economy that is holding the dollar is the United States economy. Now, if business there is not doing well, there's no appetite for them to hold the United States dollar. So they will move into other currency. So that is another reason. And the Vice President, knowing very well that the NPP government contributed to the positive expectation or positive outlook of the CD, would again say that, look, NPP government made this possible. The third reason that we need to note is that the Vice President had again noted that if government is not spending, unless of course the NDC is saying that decision not to spend is also a policy, right? If that is an argument, then we can all agree that then the Vice President was wrong to say that no single policy has been introduced. But I don't see the decision of government not to spend to be what you call a policy, in a sense that in the 2025 budget, certain goods and services were budgeted for. Those goods were budgeted for in anticipation that within the fiscal year, government is going to spend on those. Like it or not, at the end of the fiscal year, depending on the availability of revenue, you are going to spend on that. If the budget was cutting down expenditure, it's one thing, because it will not even reflect in the budget. But once the budget contemplates those expenditure lines and put them in the budget, you must necessarily spend on them. Otherwise, the projection on your economic growth is going to be, crippled. Now, the government is deciding not to spend. Even statutory payments have not been done. Even if like compensation that are due certain members of parliament, Article 71 holders, have not been paid, then goods and services that were procured and the government projected and budgeted for same in the budget have not been paid. Now, even new contracts that were contemplated within the budget have not been awarded, talk less of being executed. Now, if you put that into the equilibrium, into the equation, you realize that the decision not to spend is contributing to the relative stability or depreciation of the United States dollar to the currency, because there is no pressure for people to then want to change either currency or local currency into the United States dollar. So that was another point. The last point the Vice President also noted was to the effect that, even on the line of payment, was the IPP projects. We are experiencing doomsaw now, and the minister responsible for energy and green transition is complaining about the fact that we are going to have imminent collapse of agreement to the effect that Car Power, they are owing about $400 million, and that we are having to the tune of about $2 billion in the energy sector alone. Now, let's look at the accumulation of foreign reserves and the amount that is outstanding. The Gold Board reports that between January and then April, some 2.7 billion were accumulated and added to the gold, to the foreign reserves of our country. Now, energy payment alone is going to consume that. We are not even going to the over 500 million demand for, for crude oil that is supposed to come in. We are not even talking about other people who are going to China to trade. All those, if we put that into the picture, then you realize that if government begins to spend, then we will not have the same picture. Then the last thing was the fact that, look, all the time, people talk about externality or exogenous factor, and I know over the period in your line of duty and you are host of this particular economic related matter and financial matter, these exogenous factors have been explained and people have used it to justify either their inefficiency or their efficiency. Now, how does the price of gold being a factor of government policy? Virtually, it's an external factor, that the fact that gold went as much as 3,800 at a point, or 3,400 per ounce at a point in time, it's not government policy, right? The fact that cocoa prices, as at the time that we were leaving power, was around 8,800. Now it went to mark $11,000, okay, to a ton. It's not government policy.
Okay.
All right.
You've said a lot of things. I want to summarize it first for want of time.
Yeah.
You're saying that correlation and causation are not necessarily the same thing. So the fact that in the NDC's governance the currency is strengthening does not mean that they are the ones behind it. You're saying we can conclude that there's obviously more supply of dollars, which is what we can say. And then you are saying that because this supply of dollars is because of reserves. You're talking about gold reserves. Is that what you're saying? Then you said the government has refused to pay people, therefore they are not spending. So if not spending is a policy, then it's a policy.
Yeah.
But you don't see that as a major policy. Then you say, for example, that we owe IPPs over $2 billion, which is exactly the same amount or thereabouts that the Gold Board claims to have raised
in a quarter.
In a quarter. So it's very clear to you that if the government was paying the energy people, there wouldn't be that money to back the dollar. And then, what was your last point? External factors. All right, so about 5 points. Since it's a debate, let me give you the chance to respond. I've summarized the points he makes. What's your response?
Yeah, thank you for that. But that's quite interesting. I mean, to even bring in, I could see Kabiru panting through to explain all of this and raking in. I don't know what he started an LLB program. I don't know what criminal law had to do with what we're discussing in terms of correlations and causality. But to look at all of this, when you say IPPs were owed 2.5 billion and government needed to probably pay off these things, I think Dr. Bawumia and Kabiru are arguing on the length and breadth of the fact that the IPPs are meant to be made a bullet payment of 2.1 billion, which he knows and understands that never happens in any economy. You spread it over a long period of time, which would spread into 2-3 years even of payment with agreement with. So if we have this thinking within the focus of this debate, that is very faulty to start with. Now, I heard Bob.
So you are tackling the IPP first, that the payment is not supposed to be immediate.
It's not a bullet payment.
The fact that you owe 2 billion.
2 billion does not mean that 2 billion bullet payment should be made off to IPPs.
So that's your first one?
Yeah, that's my first one. Because if we want to contextualize that, that's a very faulty debate that has no basis to start with. He understands how government engages these and disburses these payments and the agreements. They may even have to renegotiate contracts at some point whatsoever.
Right.
So to look at that figure in isolation, to say this within a photographic year, which is just 2025, we read a budget. Again, when they talk about not spending, Bernard and the good listeners, the big ticket items for any government that has inherited this particular government to do was to cater for the domestic debt exchange program, to make commitment to it. By making commitment to it, you are spending. If anyone says you're not spending, I don't know where this economics is coming from. We have an IMF program. You went on a spending spree on the bond market. All of this, the government has made strong commitments to and activated the sinking fund you dissipated. Yet you say they are not commitment. I'm wondering what single policy it is that Dr. Kabiru and Dr. Bawumia understands, and one for a magic one to say that this is what the NDC government did as far as the stabilization of the CD is concerned. In any case, you look at all of this, what are the key variables to stabilizing the currency? They talk about the gold for oil program as though it was a novelty coming from them. In the wake, or in the run-up to, or post-COVID, when central banks in developing countries were trying to stabilize their reserves and get liquidity, that was the program they resorted to, having reserve-backed currencies, using gold. And if you went into this to say that you want to turn and pat yourselves at the back by saying that this is what you did, I think that again did not, because your central bank posted losses in a period where a bank uses the functionality of an instrument of moral suasion to determine that, and you had a governor saying that it amounted to nothing. Those were the whistles and bells of the economy. So these were the issues we had prior to. So we had a government that have inherited. We speak also as if we're speaking in a vacuum. We inherited an IMF program. The program has not even expired. There's no financial headroom to even do anything. So when you keep saying the government is not spending, when there is paper spending, when you go to, or a finance minister or head of the treasury goes to parliament to present a budget, the spending starts from there once the budget is approved. So when you and your boss say we are not spending, I don't know where that is actually coming from. The commitments that are